The year is 1492. Two worlds which had evolved separately on opposite sides of the globe are on a collision course towards one another. A diverse collection of Native American tribes occupy the New World. The Europeans, who have their sights set on growth and expansion of power, represent the Old World. The inevitable collision occurred at 2 o'clock in the morning on October 12th, 1492. This is the moment the Spanish explorer Christopher Columbus first set foot on land in the New World. Although Columbus was not the first non-native to reach the Americas, his voyage in 1492 set off a chain reaction that had profound consequences around the globe. The big question or learning target that you should be able to answer in your own words after watching this video is why 1492? If you watched the last video, you should know that other non-natives, most notably the Vikings, had reached the Americas before Columbus. So what made Columbus's voyage in 1492 so special? Why were Europeans able to capitalize on this particular encounter in ways they had not been able to in the past? And why do we have to learn that stupid saying, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue? Now I want to start this video with a simple question. Who is this guy? Duh, it's Christopher Columbus. Well, if this is Columbus, then who are all these guys? What if I told you that all of these are portraits of Columbus? And no, he couldn't mutate into different bodies. So which one of these is the real Christopher Columbus? And how do we even know what Christopher Columbus even looked like? The truth is that Columbus never sat down for a portrait at any time during his lifetime. All of these portraits I just showed you were created sometime after he died. The best evidence we have of Columbus's appearance comes from just two primary sources. And if you're interested, I encourage you to pause the video, read the descriptions below, and decide for yourself which artist did the best job of capturing the real Christopher Columbus. Now, to understand why we make such a big fuss about Columbus in 1492, we need to hit the rewind button and back up a few centuries in history. In the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries, there were a series of expeditions called the Crusades. The Crusades were attempts by European Christians to retake the Holy Land of Jerusalem from the Muslims. For the most part, the Crusades were unsuccessful. But while the Crusaders were traveling in the Middle East, they developed a taste for spices and other goods from the Far East, from places like China and India. The European demand for these Asian goods re-established a centuries-old trading network known as the Silk Road. Europe's demand for Asian goods only grew larger after Marco Polo, an Italian adventurer, returned to Europe with fantastic stories about his 20-year stay in China. Unfortunately for the Europeans, this trade route would not last. In 1450, the Ottoman Empire captured Constantinople at a critical point along the Silk Road, halting overland trade between Europe and Asia. The Europeans needed to find an alternative route to Asia. At that time, educated people in Europe believed there were only 3 continents in the world: Europe, Asia, and Africa. And Africa was the most unknown to Europeans, as you can see from this map in 1482. All that changed in the middle of the 15th century as Portuguese ships sailed further and further down the coast of Africa. The Portuguese set up trading posts along the coast of Africa, primarily to purchase African slaves. In 1488, the Portuguese explorer Bartholomew Diaz returned to Europe with exciting news. He had sailed around the southern tip of Africa. It would only be a matter of time before the Portuguese established an eastern maritime route all the way to Asia. Into this scene stepped an Italian mariner and adventurer named Christopher Columbus. Columbus was obsessed with sailing to Asia. We know this because he read the stories of Marco Polo and took notes in the margins of his books. Columbus approached Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand of Spain with a plan. "I will reach the east by sailing west," Columbus declared. The king and queen's advisors thought Columbus was nuts, but not for the reason you might think. Because contrary to popular myth, They did not believe the earth was flat. Nearly all educated people at the time knew the earth was a sphere. Instead, they correctly believed that the earth was much larger than Columbus had imagined. But ultimately, Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand gave Columbus money to finance the trip because Spain was so desperate to keep up with their rival Portugal for access to Asian trade routes. Now, I don't want to leave you with the impression that Columbus was the only person who believed you could reach Asia by sailing west from Europe. Columbus corresponded with an Italian geographer named Toscanelli, who told Columbus that by taking the ocean route westward to the Indies, the journey is much shorter than by the overland route eastward or by the sea route to the southeast. On board Columbus's ship was a chart similar to this one made by Toscanelli. You can see on the chart China and Japan incorrectly located just west of Europe across the Atlantic Ocean. Still, it's hard to imagine what Columbus could have said to convince 90 crew members to sail into the vast uncharted ocean without sufficient supplies to make the return trip home. Columbus must have been a heck of a salesperson. Whatever he said must have worked because Columbus and his crew boarded 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, and set sail west. They sailed for 33 days. With his crew becoming increasingly mutinous, Columbus resorted to lying to them about their location. Finally, on October 12th, a crew member shouted in the middle of the night, "Tierra, tierra!" Land had been spotted. Columbus was so convinced that he had landed on the Asian continent in the Indies that he called the native people he encountered there Indians. In reality, Columbus first made landfall at an island in the Bahamas. Had he not run into 2 massive continents, Columbus and his men would surely have died at sea. Sometimes I guess it's better to be lucky than smart. Columbus had sailed 3,720 miles when he reached the Bahamas. He was still 7,590 miles away from his destination.
It's science. It's science.
Columbus and Toscanelli were simply wrong. Columbus made up for his ignorance of science and geography by being an incredibly skillful mariner. He discovered ocean and wind currents that allowed him to make 3 more journeys to the New World. On each journey, he followed the clockwise pattern of ocean currents and wind. Columbus knew that to get the Spanish crown to finance subsequent trips, he would need evidence of his discovery. Consequently, Columbus brought gold and Native American slaves back with him to Europe. Columbus died still believing that what he had discovered was part of Asia. So let's do a quick recap by focusing on the big question, why 1492? Others had reached the New World before Columbus, but their impact was minimal. In 1492, conditions were just right for a history-altering moment. First, European demand for Asian goods was at an all-time high. Europeans would go to desperate lengths to expand their trade routes to Asia. Second, the Portuguese had demonstrated the feasibility of long-range ocean navigation in Africa. Third, Spain was increasing in unity, wealth, and power under King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. In other words, the conditions were right for Spain to become a colonial power. By 1492, important advances had been made in technology. The printing press spread ideas and knowledge far more quickly than ever before. For example, Columbus's description of his first voyage was printed and widely distributed across Europe shortly after he returned home. Navigational technology had also improved. The magnetic compass, which was used by Columbus, allowed ship captains to determine the direction they were traveling with far more accuracy than the previous methods that had relied on the sun and stars. Each of these factors explains why Columbus's discovery in 1492 was different than previous encounters between Old and New World inhabitants. Now, before you move on, make sure you can answer this big question in your own words. Why 1492? And as always, thanks for watching.